right, I just wanted to get started. Greetings, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Career Labs Learning Series on our webinar entitled Career and Learning Journeys, Upskilling Your Workforce for the Future. Before we begin, I'd like to do some quick housekeeping. It looks like we have a lot of people on this call. In order to make this webinar most successful, I'd like to ask you to please list your questions in the Q&A section on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. We'll do our best to answer your questions at the end of the presentation. We may also try and take some questions during the presentation if time allows. Also, please note that this webinar is being recorded, and we'll be sending you a link to the presentation shortly after the call. That being said, I'm proud to introduce you to today's speakers. First, I'd like to welcome someone who needs no introduction in the HCM technology landscape, the one and the only Mr. Josh Bersin. And for those of you living under a rock for the past decade, Josh is the principal and founder of Bersin by Deloitte, and he is the leading futurist and guru in the talent management space. So welcome, Josh.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, we also have, it's my honor to introduce you to Jo Mills. Jo is the co-founder and president of Client and Product Strategy at Fuel 50. She was a finalist for the coveted Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year Award and was ranked as one of the top global influencers in employee career experience at the annual Employee Engagement Awards. So welcome, Jo.
Hi, everyone.
And last but not least, I'd like to introduce you to Becky Willis. Becky is the VP of Enterprise Engagement at EdCast. And prior to EdCast, she was a co-founder of Will Learn Consulting, where she advised enterprise-level customers on digital learning strategy and development. And she also managed innovation and strategy for learning at HP and HPE. So welcome, Becky. Welcome to the call.
Thanks, Anthony.
So our esteemed panel, just to let everyone know this esteemed panel brings a tremendous amount of knowledge, real-world experience, and vision to the table today. So I think that everyone here is really in for a treat. But with that being said, I'd like to pass the mic over to you, Josh.
Thank you, Jeff. And Becky and Jo, it's going to be fun to talk together during the next hour. We're going to talk about career and learning, upskilling your workforce for the future, which is a great topic because it is the #1 topic on the minds of business leaders everywhere I go. I won't tell you how I know that, but I'm in the middle of some research projects that you're going to find out about next year that basically show that from the CEO level down, skills, careers, and employee talent mobility is now reached a crisis level because of the economy, and we're going to try to give you some insights today as to why that is and what you can do about it. And it does come down to this idea of careers in the 21st century, which is a big topic. It's been written about a lot. I've written about it, and many of you have probably seen some of the things that are out there, but it's really different, and we're all learning as we go. So what I'm going to try to do for the beginning of the session is give you my perspectives on what's been happening. And then we're going to hear from Becky and Jo about theirs because they're very detailed and knowledgeable about this too. And by the end of this, you should be able to walk away with some really, really good insights and examples of what to do. So the first thing I want to start with is a little bit economic context. For those of you that pay attention to the, first of all, everybody on this webcast should be reading the Wall Street Journal and paying attention to the economy because what we do in HR and learning is very, very dependent on the economic cycle. And the economic cycle we're in right now is one like I actually have never seen before. And we're reaching unemployment levels that are so low. In some countries, they're close to zero. I was in Eastern Europe a couple of months ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, and many of the people I talked to said that they believe the unemployment rate is 1% or less, and that they are so afraid of losing somebody because they know that it's almost impossible to replace them. Now, as I've written about in a couple of articles, this creates gigantic amounts of stress. It may be good for workers, although I think there's some questions on that too, but all of your people are asking about wage increases. They're poking around on the internet if they're professionals, looking at other jobs. They're getting offers for other jobs. Your CEO is wondering how he or she can keep up with competition. When everybody's growing, the stress is higher for your company to grow even more. So it's creating some, really interesting and difficult challenges in HR. And the biggest one is the idea of a career and the relationship between hiring and internal mobility, which I'm going to talk a little bit about as we get going. And this has reached the CEO level, as I mentioned before, and I try to keep up on, as many studies as I can, and this is the one that I thought was maybe the most interesting. This is from the Conference Board, and they interview 570 CEOs this year. Every year they do this, and if you go back over the 4 or 5 years that, in the last decade, last year it was topics like cybersecurity, immigration, political instability. This year it's all about talent. It's about retaining people, attracting people, developing people, and then the social issues around talent of, are we a fair, inclusive, transparent workforce, and do we know how to measure the effectiveness and the performance of our people? And that's one of the things that goes on that gets in the way of career management, as I'll show you, is when you put together a career development program for people inside of your company, you're creating opportunities for people to be unproductive. Because when I change roles, I'm not going to be as good at the new role as I was at the last role. Now, it's still the right thing to do, but how we measure performance can either complement or get in the way. And one of the things that, and probably the most, biggest driver of all of this talent disruption is automation. And, I've been through multiple cycles of automation in my career, so I'm not, too surprised to see this. But right now, for the last 2 years, there's been a lot of fear about automation, and that, 45 to 50% of jobs were going to be somehow replaced by machines. The data is now in that actually the opposite is true. The more automation that we bring into organizations, the more jobs we create. We're creating jobs that are different. We're now all being augmented by machines, salespeople, marketing people, customer service people. There are new jobs for people to build software tools and train software and monitor software, but they're all higher-level thinking jobs and less routine jobs. So the trend on work is actually more jobs at a higher level, and that's basically driven by the digital economy. And the digital economy is not digitization from a technology standpoint. It's a change in business model. If you really look at most of the research that's been done on digital transformation, and I've read a lot of it, and we used to do it. I did it a lot while I was at Deloitte. You might think that the digital business is one that does business through apps and does business online, and that's the external view. But behind the scenes, in order to make that happen, everybody in the company has to become essentially a service worker. We're very, very close to customers now. We're constantly iterating on the tools and software and products that we sell. If you're in the software engineering, you're constantly iterating on your website. If you're in marketing, you're constantly looking at data. If you're in sales, you're constantly looking at leads. I mean, everything's turning real-time service delivery oriented. And I think a good example of how big this has become is a deal that was announced yesterday or the day before. For those of you that didn't notice, SAP went out and spent $8 billion cash on a company that basically manages the experience that measures and manages the experience of employees and customers, Qualtrics. And the funny thing about the deal is not just that it's a big deal, but Qualtrics was about to go public at a valuation of about 2/3 of that number. So this has created a really big emphasis on understanding the services that are needed and putting in place organization structures that allow the company to deliver real-time services internally or externally. In fact, there's a really, really interesting article in the Harvard Business Review this month about how companies are building microservices inside of their companies. And by the way, I'm going to talk more about that relative to HR. But everything we do inside of the company is a service too. And if you're not able to respond quickly to customer needs internally, you're going to have just as many problems as you are externally. And so I won't spend a lot of time on the Harvard Business article, but it's some pretty interesting examples about how companies have turned themselves inside out to be service delivery organizations. Now, one of the biggest things that's happened, in the last 5 years as a result of all this is the way we are organized. And, I never studied organizational design and sort of tripped into this in some of the research we did in Deloitte. And one of the things we found 2 or 3 years ago when we were surveying companies about their business issues I think it was 2016. The number one problem they cited that particular year was that the organization structure was getting in the way for the organization to do what it needed to do. And the simple story is that the hierarchy that you see on the left, which is basically what's built into just about every piece of enterprise software you've been buying, is not actually the way work gets done. Work gets done in teams, in groups, in projects, in initiatives organized around customers or geographies or products or services or initiatives or strategies. And we all work on those projects and multiple of them at the same time for many of us, and we still also have functional jobs. So we're in this middle of this transition from having a functional job description that's written down on a piece of paper and put into the ERP system to some role of work in the future where we're going to be working in a much more agile way. And the companies that are outperforming are the ones that are institutionalizing the model on the right. Now, the model on the right is a model where you work on a project that is the right role for you based on your skills. It's not a job you get because you're a certain level or a certain job title or you're friends with somebody. And you make that decision based on your needs and the company's needs. As I'll show you in a minute, it's basically sort of a career decision. Somebody comes to you and says, we've got a gigantic project to work on the redesign of something. We think you'd be a good fit. So you go through this mental decision in your head, well, that sounds like fun. I mean, would I be good at that job? Would I like it? Would it take advantage of my skills? Will it get me where I want to go? That's the way businesses are going to operate in the future. We haven't built the right tools for that yet. I mean, this is what Fuel 50 and EdCast are all about. Those are Fuel 50 and EdCast are two companies that have basically built the tools you need to operate like a company on the right. But I think, unfortunately, many of the talent practices and systems we bought in the past were optimized for the picture on the left, and that's really, kind of what we want to talk about today. Now, but it's even more complicated than that. In addition to that, this need for more agile, continuous change of roles around automation and services, we also have this demographic issue that the workforce is becoming more diverse in many, many ways. Obviously, it's more diverse through gender, through race, through economic background, but also through age. And one of the interesting things that, and it's actually kind of cool to me that the HBR people are working on this, but we wrote about this 2 years ago in Deloitte. The largest segment of the working population, the largest growing segment, the two largest growing segments are women and people over the age of 50. Now, that sounds a little odd, but people are living longer, significantly longer every year. And so people in their 60s, like me, are not retiring. It's not necessarily, not only for financial reasons, but for basically personal reasons. Most of us enjoy our work and we like being around other people. And companies are beginning to reach the understanding that there's a gigantic workforce out there in the 50s and 60s and older that also has a tremendous amount of skills, and obviously they know the culture of the organization and they're very comfortable with working. That we need to find a role in companies. Now, there's all sorts of issues, around this. Older people tend to make more money. Older people might need a reskilling program just like everybody else. And you have generational bias. A lot of companies, 45% of companies believe that age is a competitive disadvantage, which is sort of a bias issue, a discrimination issue. So there's lots of things here, but this is another reason that having a dynamic agile career strategy is so important. And let me give you a very specific example of this. I was in a meeting in LA a couple weeks ago, and one of the people there was one of the talent leaders at General Motors, who's going through a tremendous amount of restructuring around electric cars and automation and many, many things. And he said one of the things we decided to do is we are inviting back all of our retirees in manufacturing and engineering to come back to GM under a program we call Take Two, where we will reskill them and give them flexible work opportunities to come back and contribute to the teams that they might have been a part of 5 to 10 years earlier. And I think we're going to see more of that. So this is another reason why building an agile career model is so important. And then there's obviously the issue of skills. And I like this chart because it's interesting for a couple of reasons. First of all, every year this chart looks different. Right now, machine learning, AI, those are the hot skills. 2 years ago it was data scientist. You're going to watch data scientists move down every year as in something else replaces it. So there's always something new that we really, really want to find skilled people in. And you know, you have this issue in companies of, well, we don't know how to do that, so let's go hire somebody that knows how to do it. Well, by the way, everybody else is trying to do the same thing. So there's a trade-off between buying and building those skills, which I'll show you some information on that in a minute. But also you can see that the soft skills are as rare and in demand as the technical skills. And the reason for that, as most of you probably know, for most of you in HR, is that for every automated job, you know, that's created where we have to design a machine or develop a new website, there's about 20 jobs around it. The jobs of software engineering, digital design, hardware engineering make up only about 5 or 6% of the workforce. Most of us are affected by automation in our use of these tools, not in our design and repair and implementation of these tools. So you look at sales representative, customer service management, brand partner, personal loan consultant. I mean, these are skills that are in big demand too. In fact, I put something out on Twitter last week that one of the more recent studies that LinkedIn just put out on skills in demand in the San Francisco Bay Area, and the San Francisco Bay Area, by the way, is the most skills-starved city in the country now, which is sort of a funny award to win. The number one skill demanded in LinkedIn job descriptions in the San Francisco Bay Area is oral communication, which just tells you that while we're worrying about all these technical skills, we also have to teach people how to work in teams, how to be better at persuasion, communication, cognitive thinking styles. All of these things are growing in importance too. And there's evidence that shows that younger people coming out of college are actually becoming very, very good in the digital domain, but not as good in the human domain. And so companies are, you know, we still have to continue to invest in soft skills. Now, so what's going on in careers? Let me just throw you a couple things to look at. I think the simple answer, let me go back to this. Let me show you this one first. The best way I like to think about careers is what I, wrote an article called Catching the Wave. The way careers work today is it isn't a linear path anymore. I mean, when I was born, and many of you are probably around my age, the whole model was very simple. You go to college, you go to high school, you go to college, you get a job, you stick around that company as long as you can, you work your way up, and then somewhere in your 60s you retire. And the company pretty much takes care of it. There's a career model. Every 2 or 3 years, you get a new position. Maybe every 4 or 5 years you get promoted. If you're really exceptional, you move into management. And then the company has a retirement program, and that's the way it goes. And as you know, that is completely gone. Your career is completely unattached from your employer now. Your career is your problem, not your employer's problem in most companies, because the employers are so busy hiring and restructuring and reorganizing themselves that they haven't been able to maintain those 30, 40-year career models. And so now your problem as an individual of education is continuous. So you need to think about your life as a continuous journey of leisure, work, and education all the time. And young people totally get this. In fact, if you look at the demand for skills amongst younger employees, and I just put an article out on some research that we just did on this, people basically look at, when you ask people why they would quit a job, growth and learning and career is twice as important as salary. Twice as important. It's not just a little more important, it's twice as important. And the reason for that is that young people who grew up during the 2008 recession saw a lot of layoffs, they saw a lot of jobs going away, and they're buying an insurance policy on their own lives. And they're saying, you know what, I'm going to learn everything I can. I'm going to make sure I'm staying current in my profession. I'm going to look for new jobs, and I'm going to do some gig work on the side. In fact, 40% of millennials and Gen Z workers have some sort of side hustles so they can continuously supplement their salaries and move to something new in case something doesn't go well in the company they're in. So there's a lot of pressure that's changed on organizations to adapt to that. Now, how do you do it? It's a tricky problem, and Joe's much more of an expert on it than I am, but I'll tell you, this picture always sort of nails it for me, and I think people find it helpful, is this is essentially the problem, is on the one hand, in the HR function, we need to get our heads wrapped around what the organization's needs are, and that's not easy in itself. I had a meeting with 40 or 50 heads of recruiting not too long ago, and I asked them, how many of you are taking all the information you have about open positions and skills in demand and showing it to the Learning and Development Department so they can develop those skills? And not a single person raised their hand. So in order to make that red circle work, we all in HR have to do a much better job of working together and sharing information so we have good insights on the jobs, the skills, the roles, the locations that are opening up, and we can align that and make that information visible to people. And this is really what Fuel 50 has built a business around doing, is designing a system that allows you to do that in a scalable way. On the right side, we have the problem of the individual. I'm an engineer and I want to learn how to be a project manager. I'm a salesperson and I want to become a large account salesperson. I'm a marketing person and I want to do digital lead generation. I'm a supervisor and I want to become a manager. And this is where EdCast fills in, is really embracing and empowering people to not only skill themselves, but tell the organization what they want to do. Now, I think in most companies, the original thoughts on how you would bring these things together was with this thing in the middle called an individual development plan. And, that was a probably 1980s idea that was developed by a lot of, great HR people, and it was thrown into the performance management process, and we sat down as managers and tried to do it. And in a world where the company was well known and the company was predictable and we had pretty, linear career models, that was not super hard to do. Today, I would say most managers don't know what the career opportunities are in their own company. So without a tool like Fuel 50 coupled with a tool like EdCast, this thing in the middle is pretty hard to do, and it tends to be left to the employee to do on their own. And I'll tell you something funny about that. We did a study of the model of, you own your own career, which a lot of companies tend to say to employees. And we found that when you tell people you own your own career, you underperform by almost 30% over an organization that actually helps you find a job and actually builds a facilitated mobility strategy for people to find the right jobs. So we need to all work on this. And it's changed. It affects many things. It isn't just creating a career portal and giving people some self-assessments and teaching managers how to coach their people, which is tough enough. Believe me, that's hard enough to do. It's a lot of other things. It's having mentoring in the company. It's applying developmental funding to people moving from role to role. It's letting people decide for themselves and volunteer for positions. It's opening up visibility to gig work and project assignments inside the company so people who are ambitious can find those opportunities. It also means rewarding people for their experiences when what they know how to do may not be on their resume. And as I said earlier, this is just more data on the topic I mentioned earlier. It's very, very important to employees, and this is another version of the same data. And this basically comes from some research I did with Glassdoor, which basically shows that in many surveys of why people select an employer and why people leave an employer, learning and development, career management, coaching are almost always number one, and usually the reason people leave. In fact, if you do exit interviews, 3 to 6 months after somebody leaves, and ask them why they really left, not the first week, because they usually don't tell you, there's usually two answers. I didn't like my manager, and I just wasn't going anywhere. And, in this job market, those are not things you want to hear. Now, I threw this slide in just as a little inspiration for you guys. I've done a lot of work on this over the years with all these different research reports I've written and things I've worked on with different companies, and I just want to say it's not as easy as you think. Tools like Fuel 50 and EdCast are absolutely essential to putting this in place, because if you don't have the transparency and an open, essentially economy of jobs inside the company, it's going to be very hit or miss. But there's all these cultural things too, and these are mostly cultural things, but I want you to look at them, and then you can get the slides later. But you got to think about a whole program behind it. And I can tell you from the research we've done on the Bersin side that every time we do a study of this, the companies that focus in this area outperform. And the other part of it, of course, is making the learning organization adaptable too. I'm in the middle of writing a pretty big report on this, and I would say that the L&D function is really in a renaissance right now. We went through 3 years of sort of being stuck in the mud. We had old learning management systems. We had, more traditional e-learning content, and employees were going out on the Internet and finding courses and programs and experiences that they weren't finding internally. Today, as this has reached a crisis level, the money being spent on L&D, the technology, the investment, the innovation is just incredible. And so we're now able to meet the needs of your employees in ways you never could before. And if you haven't looked at tools like EdCast, for those of you that are on the webinar, you will be amazed at what they do. These are like, viral learning systems that unleash the passion for learning in the organization that's always been there in ways we never could before. And they're really kind of paradigm-shifting tools. And because the problem has been the paradigm, really the problem we've had in the learning and development side of this is we didn't have a paradigm of self-learning. We didn't have a paradigm of self-authoring. We didn't have a paradigm of empowerment and discovery. In my career, and I've probably been working about 40 years, I'm constantly reading and looking for things and talking to people and asking people questions and reading books. But it's usually a problem of discovery. If I'm in a big company, it's easier for me to find stuff on the Internet than it is to find it internally. And so this idea of digital learning and continuous learning, it's a nice concept, but if it doesn't exist, all we can do is talk about it. So what EdCast has done, and I'll let Becky talk about it in more detail, is really automate and build the technology that allows you to deliver learning as needed as people transition into their new roles in these careers. And a lot of it is just accepting the fact that micro-learning is real and it's good and we can embrace it. And it doesn't replace or compete with traditional learning. I would say, the research basically shows that both of these are important. There are periods of time in the early stage of your job or career or role that you're going to need structured training. And that might be a class in a classroom. You might be off-site. It might be 3 days. Or it might be a structured program online that goes on for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. But there's a massive amount of information people want as they move up the learning curve that's in an unstructured form. And so we never really had systems that did both. We had good systems for the gray triangle on the left. We really had almost nothing for the picture on the right. And now, companies like EdCast have systems that allow you to make this formula work for everybody. And it's a complicated market, and I won't spend a lot of time on this, but I will say that what we've done here in this webinar is tried to bring together two vendors of many that really fill this need of learning on one side and career management on the other. And I'm telling you, if you can solve those both problems simultaneously with some of the integrations these guys have done, you're going to see just a transformational change in the way your company operates. Okay, this is something interesting I just sort of threw in. I just wanted you guys to see. One of the projects I was just involved in over the summer was a study that we did with LinkedIn, and we actually surveyed people who had access to a lot of learning. They happen to have access to LinkedIn Learning in this particular case, but it would apply to anything else, and looked at the outcomes of people who spent more time in a learning environment at work. And it's hard, so 7% of these 2,500 or so people spent 5 hours or more a week learning. 46% that spent very little, and 47% somewhere in the middle. And we did ask them a bunch of questions about their jobs and their careers and their work satisfaction. And sure enough, the people that are spending more time learning are happier, more productive, less stressed. I mean, just look at that chart. It sort of blows your mind. So it's just a reminder that the work we do to make the learning experience better, to make the career experience better, has a huge payoff, huge. I mean, and so, if somebody sits around here and asks me about the ROI of learning, I'll just pull this chart out and see if they like that. You've probably seen this article that came out a year or two ago about AT&T, and I like to bring it up because, the reason I bring this up is there aren't many companies that are 150 years old that are still thriving. AT&T is one of the oldest companies in the United States, probably one of the oldest companies in the world, so I'm sure it's in the top 50 older companies. They have been through every technology revolution you can imagine. My wife worked there. It's a very high-performing organization. And the decision they made 2 or 3 years ago was that the only way we are going to transition into the new world of digital and cyber and social and video and all the stuff that we're doing online is we're going to have to tell our workforce it's reinvent or leave. And so rather than be hard-handed about it, they basically built a system very much like Fuel 50 and EdCast, and they said to their employees, here are the skills that are appreciating in AT&T. These are the skills that if you skill yourself in these areas, you're going to find more jobs and more salaries, more money, and more rewards. Here are the skills we don't need. So if you're a specialist in these areas, you probably need to spend some time reskilling yourself. And as a result of that, they've had an enormous amount of organizational transformation that's been very, very successful. I mean, they just went out and bought CNN. I mean, they're just an incredible company. And so if you're a company in whatever industry you may be in and you feel like you can't do this, go look at AT&T and how long they've been doing this. And this is a perfect example of exactly the solution we're talking about on this webinar. Okay, 1 or 2 more quick things, and I'm going to wrap it up, and I want to turn it over to Joe and to Becky. The first is it's not all online. You cannot do this entirely digitally. And I think most of you know this, but I'll just reinforce it, that even though micro and macro learning online is great, meeting people, getting to know people, developing relationships, collaborating, learning through activities together is really important. So corporate universities are still important. In fact, I think they're more important than ever right now because we spend so much time virtually and at home. And experiential learning, learning on the job, mentorship, coaching are critically important. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But you can't develop a 21st century career experience in your company unless the management is involved, unless managers are okay with people changing roles, they coach people, they develop people, managers are rewarded for their talent strategy and their talent efforts. That has to be part of this too. And I think the biggest issue that you're probably dealing with right now, given the job market, is this. And this is something we're doing some work at Deloitte right now, is when do you hire from the outside and when do you train from within? And this is maybe the biggest thing that will get in the way of a career program. And the reason it's so difficult is that, and it's funny, I just got some data. We asked a bunch of companies, why would you hire from the outside instead of train from within? And the 2 most frequently cited answers are, number 1, we don't have enough money to train from within, but we have more money to hire. And did you know that the cost of hiring a critical skill is 6 times higher than developing internally? So we have this weird situation where training budgets are very small and recruiting budgets are very big. I'm not sure that makes sense, but that's just sort of the way things are, and we need to take that on. And the second is we don't think we have the skills internally. Well, look, listen, you could say that about every company that's ever been invented. That isn't a problem of skills. It's what we call adjacent skills. Okay, we don't have anybody that knows AI, but we have a lot of people that know statistics. We have a lot of mathematicians. We have a lot of actuaries. You know, the relationship between AI and all that stuff, it's tiny. It's a very small difference. We have a lot of people that know how to do web design, but we don't have a lot of Java programs. We have a lot of people that know HTML, but they don't know Angular. Those are very, very adjacent skills. So I think one of the most important things for you to think about in your company is how do you, square these two circles and bring this together into a more meaningful way. And that's why I talked in the very beginning about how important it is for the recruiting organization to talk to the learning organization to share information and data. Okay, so I'm going to sort of wrap it up, and then we're going to do some Q&A, and we'll talk to Joe and Becky. I will sort of conclude with this, which is a slide that we developed, quite a while ago, but it still applies. This is still dependent on culture. And when you look at the companies that are doing this well, whether it be Cisco or Microsoft or whoever, AT&T, what you find is that underneath these great systems in these programs is a CEO-level understanding that learning is the business that we're in. And, Satya Nadella at Microsoft wrote a whole book on this, on bringing a growth mindset into Microsoft. And I just had a really interesting meeting where John Chambers spoke, who's a retired CEO of Cisco, and he basically said the same thing. These great companies, the AT&Ts, Microsoft, Cisco, whoever you want to compare yourself to, they have a culture of learning. They have a culture of development. They have a culture of talent mobility. They have a culture of sharing. They have a culture of mentorship. So that falls squarely in our laps in the HR profession, and it's something that we can all do something about. So that's a little bit of an introduction to this topic. What I'd like to do now is we're going to turn it over to two other experts here and get a little input from them. And let me start with Joe. Joe, you've been consulting and advising and building solutions on careers for years. What have you seen that's really critical to building a 21st century career experience, and what would you like to tell people as sort of their critical next steps?
Thanks, Josh. Just really resonating with everything that you're talking about today, and it's certainly reflecting what we're hearing from our client base as well. What we've seen in our conversations with CEOs is that having the right talent right now and for the future is really top of mind. But as you expressed, that skill anxiety from employees is also very real, and people are demanding clarity on how they can grow their capability so that they feel really confident about their future. So I guess I see that there's three key goals here. Firstly, each individual needs to understand their unique talent and value footprint, so how they're contributing right now, but also how they can continue to grow that each and every day. Secondly, I just want to echo that leaders play a critical role as career advocates for their employees. So supporting each person to access learning and development, with developing talent being a very critical and key leader success metric. And I guess finally for HR, that the overall imperative should be to create an energized and driven employee base who see learning as a daily activity. And we need to provide each employee with the means to develop on a daily basis. So echoing everything that you've just said, Josh, we've seen that in our clients, and it's certainly top of mind for CEOs.
So given that, and given your experience, I want to get you to talk a little bit more about how. Can you give us an example of a company that does this really well and what you think they've done that other people could learn from?
I guess in terms of organisations that we're working with, where we see it work really well is where there's a desire to get to the heart of that employee experience. So we work with organisations such as Ultimate Software, we work with MasterCard, Ingersoll Rand, and where we see that real lever shifting in terms of engagement and productivity is where they're enabling their leaders to have better and more meaningful development conversations. And they're linking the passions and the drivers for each person through to a curated list of learning and talents that are going to help the business to grow. So it's about understanding that talent bench strength that you're hoping to build right now, but also extrapolating what you're going to need for tomorrow. And as we know, that's a really hard question. It's very difficult to know what's around the corner. But organisations that are mobilising their workforce to be talent builders and growth focused are the ones that are having the most success.
Right. Okay, great. Fantastic. Which leads me to your relationship with EdCast and what EdCast does. So, Becky, you've been sort of on the other half of this coin now for a year or two, helping companies with their new learning strategies. What have you learned about the learning journey, and how can we make the learning journey as developmental and career-oriented as the career itself, career model itself?
Yeah, great question. I think from the perspective of the customers, which, as you say, I've been learning even more from my own background and what our customers are actually doing today. The key to it all is the great delivery of content is the experience. We talk about, and you had a recent article, Josh, about user experience versus user interface, and that's one of my passions in there. Mm-hmm. I think once they have a really great experience, it should be one that lets employees find the right content targeted to their right goals when they need it, which is a lofty goal, but I think we're able to achieve that and Fuel 50 is going to help us in that way by targeting the goals, and that lets our AI take over, deliver that appropriate content into learning journeys. And our AI engine curates and delivers a great customer experience that all of us have come to expect regardless of the generation that we're in. It enables individuals to upskill with a blend of content that adapts to their needs and enables the enterprise to build a continuous learning environment.
Great. Well, tell me, so I think I'm sure there's questions you guys, I can't see the questions for some reason, so if there's any questions from the outside, somebody let me know. I think you guys are going to show us a demo of what EdCast and Fuel 50 can do. Is that what's next? We're actually going to see some of this? Great.
Yeah, we'd love to show you a little bit very quickly around how the interface works and how we connect the dots between those key passions and drivers for each and every person, but also across to how that creates a really easy learner experience as well. I'm just going to share my screen, and so hopefully everybody now can see the Fuel 50 platform, which says "Hi Joe," and I'm going to take you on a very quick journey of what the platform, how it works, and how that integrates with EdCast as well. So essentially what Fuel 50 does is it takes people on a journey of discovery. So we enable people to articulate their passions, their talents, their drivers, everything that's important to them right now, and map that through to development, be it learning digs in the workplace, whether it's mentors, coaches, roles, and also learning journeys within EdCast. So really helping people curate their list of talents and then map that to learning just in time for them. So we help people start with that understanding of what their value footprint is. And we have a series of gamified fun exercises that help people unpack their values, both personal and career, and their satisfaction, what they love to do and what they're great at, their fit or work style, and their agility, so their current state of play around their career. But of particular importance as we think about that talent and development planning, a list of curated capabilities is super important for each and every individual. So essentially what Fuel 50 does with talent is help people to articulate a list of capabilities that they want to grow and that they want to learn within the organisation. So the individual is presented with a range of competencies which are important for them that have been curated to their particular business area and that are going to make sense for them as an individual. And in the moment, they can see exactly what these capabilities look like, what the level of competency or success looks like. They can mark their own capability, and they can also indicate whether they want to develop or learn. Now, this provides very valuable data up to the organisation at an aggregate level or by demographic groups, so you can target learning programs around particular needs, or very simply as an individual, I can click through to a learning journey within EdCast and see exactly how I grow that particular capability. So we help people to articulate that great list of talent.
So you guys have done an integration where you can go from the career exploration right to a learning journey in EdCast. Is that what you guys did together?
Yeah, spot on, Josh. So
Okay,
really
great.
closing that loop for people, because we've identified that the person needs cross-selling as a particular capability for their own role, future opportunities, or within the organisation. And the organisation has told us that this is critical. And then we help people link directly through to how they're going to grow that. So for our just-in-time world that we live in, makes it super easy for people to develop on the go. We also help people link these talents through to their aspirations. So we present individuals with matches based on who they are and what's important to them, and then they can immediately see exactly what those gaps are. And once again, link through to learning pathways, to gigs, or get feedback in the moment to validate their own self-scores, to create that learning moment for that individual. Within our career journeys, we take that a little bit of a step further. So if I do have an aspiration of where I'd like to be in the business, we create a fast-track analysis of how people can actually make that step. So each pathway shows the fastest path possible between my aspirational role and where I am today, and then I can deep dive into that, into the moment, to see exactly how I'm going to make that happen. Now, this really supports that agile mindset, because this is dynamically driven, it's changing with the organisation. I've always got the most up-to-date list of capabilities and skills that the organisation needs. And then once again, I can link through to learning in the moment so that I can make that a reality. So essentially what we're doing is helping people to level up and make sure that they've got the learning journeys on standby to help them to grow.
And here we are in EdCast. We're sitting in a pathway that is focused on that particular skill, sales forecasting. So a pathway to us is a collection of blended learning that allows you to have a number of different solutions that work towards a badge, or you can mix in internal and external content. And this link from Fuel 50 feeds in to EdCast. I'll show you how that works in a second. But let's take a look at, now that we've fed these contents into EdCast, let's take a look at the Me tab within the top of EdCast there. And let's take a look and see what that has done for us. So for Fuel 50, if you can scroll just a little bit down, there we go. Within the dashboard, it's going to show you that the 3 skills that Joe just showed you in Fuel 50 have been automatically fed into EdCast. So Fuel 50 feeds in this content, and it allows our AI to serve up the content that you need. And Joe, if you can click on the Home tab now, that would be great. And you'll see how the AI is working, because we popped in those pieces, those skills that you needed, and you're looking at them within the Home tab. This is what we call today's insights. These are different pieces of content. You'll see 2 here from Coursera, the content that comes from all sorts of different areas that are blended, internal, external, formal content, informal content, whatever that blend is, as Josh talked about in his talk, that is necessary in there. And we can also customize these tabs, the Home, Discover Me, and what is up at today's Insight, to what fits within your corporate environment as well. So now that we're in the Home tab, one thing I'd like to show is the Discover tab. If you don't mind, Joe, if you can go to that one. One of the comments that Josh did made, he talked about the problem of discovery, and that is a real problem for people today. As he mentioned, people are also looking on the web. They're trying to find answers in a lot of different ways. And what we want to do from a corporate environment is be able to serve up content to people that is filtered and curated just for them. So we're providing curated content through a number of different areas. You can go and search for a particular piece of content up in the search bar there. If you click on that Coursera one, that first one that's also brightly colored, you'll notice that when you click on that particular piece of content, it actually goes into the Coursera website. This is a further description, and if you view more, we'll actually open up a tab that is in Coursera. So we're actually protecting IP. We're allowing you to be able to link in a lot of external content, any kind of resources that you have that are subscriptions, or subscriptions for specific groups or anyone else that's within that area. So lots of different pieces. If you could go back to the Home tab in EdCast, Joe, I'd appreciate it. Lots of different ideas and ways of communicating and adding in how you can get to content that is filtered and curated with an AI and machine learning background that does personalize it and make it so that it's all curated just for you. That is the quickest demo I've honestly ever done.
Great. You guys, this is really, for me, this is really cool because I know you guys have been talking about this. One of the questions that just came in was, does the learning journey include experiential learning and on-the-job activities? And I know in Fuel 50 you have gigs as an object. Is there something there you guys can talk about how this would work on developmental assignments, projects, those kinds of things?
Sure. So within Fuel 50, there is a gigs feature which really creates an internal talent marketplace. So as you were saying before, Josh, as we help people to navigate across different opportunities within the organization, sometimes those don't look like a traditional job or role. Sometimes they're more of a shorter-term project or an adjunct to their current position. So what we can do is allow people to post those gigs within Fuel 50, and then those can become part of that learning journey within EdCast as well, so promoted to people as they navigate and look to learn and grow. So there's lots of beautiful ways that we can... So you could put your
gigs, so a company could put their projects, their gigs, their assignments in Fuel 50, and employees could find them as developmental activities and then apply. Is that how it works?
Correct, exactly. So
Great.
Employees can apply. It really does, democratize the workplace as well, because as we know, often choice gigs or great opportunities are offered to people that we know or that we've worked with before. So by placing that on an online platform, it enables people in pockets of the organisation that wouldn't normally have access to those great assignments to be able to put their hand up. And that's a really great way to tap into that unlocked potential and talent that's sitting there in those adjacent roles or with those adjacent skills that you might not have known were there.
Yeah, we can also apply that within the EdCast journeys, as Joe says. We can have experiential learning. We can have within a journey there can be all sorts of action learning pieces that are attached to that. And as we developed a more stringent and a tighter integration between Fuel 50 and EdCast, you're going to see a lot more of how that works together.
Great. Do you guys now, Joe, Jeffrey, are there questions? I can't see the questions. Do we have any questions from any of the people on the phone?
Yeah, Anthony. So there are a couple of questions, actually, good questions coming in from the team here. So I'll start with the first one we received. It's from Tanya Moore. Tanya says, what are best practices and how are other companies sensing external market skill trends and then using those insights to understand supply, demand, and create actions? And what are some examples of those companies?
Do you guys want me to take a stab at that?
Sure, you can start out.
It's a big problem. It's hard. I think there's three sources of data. First is you can keep up on all the information coming out from all the various future of work organizations, whether it be McKinsey, Deloitte, the World Economic Forum. There's lots and lots of studies on that. The second is you can get data directly from LinkedIn or Burning Glass that actually is real data every month on the most critical skills in demand, by city, by role, by level. And you actually can get that data. LinkedIn sells it through a product called Talent Insights, and Burning Glass sells it as another similar data feed. So if you have a workforce planning team, they should be looking at that data because it's pretty accurate because what they're doing is they're crowdsourcing the jobs that are open in the market and they're showing the trends. The third is to do it internally. You actually know more than you think. Your recruiters are hearing every day about the jobs that are open and the ones that are taking months and months and months to fill, and they're pulling their hair out, and the ones that are not, and the cities that they're not finding people. And so some of this, I think, is just talking. I met with the CHRO of a large automobile company in Japan, and we were talking about this, and he said, we did an internal project. We looked at all the positions that are open. We looked at the business plans. that our different businesses had. We mapped it against our retirement, and we found out that we're going to be short 50,000 mechanical engineers over the next 5 years. So he said, so now we're on a project to figure out where we're going to find those people. And he said one of the things we found is that one of the best talent sources for us might be Vietnam, where there's a lot of technical people that are potentially growing, that the market workforce is growing. So that's what I would say. And it generally is a project that bigger companies do, but companies that are in, cyclical industries like automobile companies do it pretty well. Defense and aerospace companies do it very well. Oil and gas companies do it pretty well. If you're a fast-growing company, you may have never done it before.
I really want to finish this call first, just in case they take me and 200 other people off of mute.
Pardon?
Someone else needs to go on mute. Yeah, and I think one of the things that we can offer, Josh, in that regard is that we have analytics that can show, are there things that people are asking for, are they searching for that you do or do not have?
Exactly.
Those are some important...
Yeah, if you buy a tool like EdCast or Fuel 50, you're going to have that data right in the system, too.
Mm-hmm.
The more it's used, the more data you'll have.
Excellent. Another question came in for Joe. What are you learning? What are you hearing from clients around career and learning experiences today?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And what we're really hearing is that organisations have that desire to know exactly what their talent bench strength is and have that up-to-date data around what people know and what they can offer to the business. But what we also know from the work we do directly with employees is that employees essentially want to do more. They're waving this flag around saying, I've got all these talents, I've got all this potential, but you're not using it. And that's where we see employees exit to other organisations where they feel that those untapped talents can be utilised. So I guess there's two things there. One is that we need to tap into what people can do today, but also what they want to learn for tomorrow and leverage that internal workforce in a more powerful way. And it all comes back to how do we help people to articulate those key capabilities that they have, and then how do we get that into various roles or opportunities across the organisation. So the businesses we're working with are really focused on helping employees articulate that and make it meaningful. So once somebody has shared these great things that they want to do or that they have, helping leaders activate that, so helping leaders find opportunities for people to grow and learn through short-term assignments, through linking them through to EdCast and Learning Journeys, and activating that talent in a meaningful way. So we're really seeing that coming together of what employees want, which is reducing their skills anxiety and sharing their skills, and also from the business to say we want to use those skills and we want to make sure we've got the right ones for the future as well.
Excellent. Thanks, Joe. It looks like from a time, we've only got time for one more question. You've had a lot of great questions, and we'll do our best to answer them after the call as well. And the last question comes in for Becky. And Becky, the question is, how does user experience factor into learning? And are the Fuel 50's capabilities available for existing EdCast customers?
Love to talk to existing EdCast customers. Joe and I were talking yesterday a little bit about, how do we make sure that people know that we have this integration and that we're working on making it even tighter. So love to talk to you about that. I think that this is a very interesting link for me. One of the things that we get asked a lot about from our customers is how do you get people to fill in the right goals so that the AI can operate off of them? And this is one of the really great ways to do that. So I'm very excited about this partnership and working together with our current and future customers.
Perfect. All right, unfortunately, it looks like we're coming up on time. We got about a minute left. I did want to say thank you to all of our esteemed panelists. Josh, Joe, and Becky, you all did an outstanding job in sharing what you're seeing in the employee career experience and the learning space. And I'm confident that everybody on this call, they appreciated your insights as much as I did. If you haven't already, and Josh, if you could fast forward 2 slides onto your presentation deck.
Sure.
If you haven't already, please register for the FuelX conferences in London on February 7th and 8th and Santa Monica on March 6th and 7th. Please keep in mind that you can still win a free trip to the London event by submitting a Fuel Awards application by December 3rd. So please do your best to get an application in for that. Who doesn't want a free trip to London? You can find the registration page and the awards application by going to www.fuel50.com/awards. And I also wanted to say a thank you to all of our listeners on the call. Your passion for leading the charge in the evolution of the work experience is going to continue to revolutionize the world of tomorrow. Thank you again for participating in this episode of the Fuel 50 Career Labs Learning Series, and we look forward to hosting you again soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.